international law goes hand in hand with US leadership. Although this may seem weird to us, the US's leadership of global governance starting in the early 20th century, across two world wars, a Cold War, and amidst the United States' war on terror is truly obvious. Good or bad, we cannot ignore the fact that the United States has at least seen itself as the city upon the hill, or the greatest and most powerful state that has ever existed in the 20th to 21st centuries, or even the entire history of mankind. The United States' influence on the development of the rules-based international order cannot be discounted, from the initiatives of its presidents to the headquarters of the main institutions of international law. But then again, the United States, especially today, is no leader and not even a stringent follower of international law. However, let's not get carried away just yet and ground our understanding of how the world actually works. Let us let go first of the big words like the vague concept of global governance and focus on the fundamentals. Let's start with the basic elements, rules, and concepts. So empty your minds, drop your intellectual pretensions, and embrace the pace of learning. Trust me, you're not the smartest person in this class. The two important elements to note for this class are politics and law. They seem to go hand in hand in the Philippines so well. Sometimes lawyers make powerful politicians, sometimes politicians become powerful lawmakers, and we cannot ignore the social reality that in order for a certain law to be carried out, we have to play politics. So first, politics. Politics is a term that we all know and hate. It is a dirty, dirty word here in the Philippines, and we tend to think that those who engage in politics do not play nice. But what truly is politics? Looking at the other fields or disciplines, we see that medicine is for health, engineering is for structures and machines, agriculture is for food production, etc., etc., etc. But for politics, it is for us and our communities, or at least our ever complicated human relationships. So a political system is a persistent pattern of human relationships that involves control, influence, power, or authority. In other words, a political system deals with human relationships that concern power and the use of that power to obtain or allocate or hoard political resources. These political resources are the means of how one person can influence the behavior of other persons. That is power, simply put. In other words, a powerful political figure utilizes political resources like land, wealth, armies, bloodlines, votes, or ideas in order to exert influence and control over other human beings. A powerful political figure determines who gets what and who can do what. Second, let's talk about law. Law is the system of rules, principles, and concepts on how relationships should be conducted within a political unit. Note that law is not the only system that guides the political aspects of society on who gets what and who can do what, but it sure is one of the most important and noble ones as compared to armed or brute force or raw politicking. This means that law is there to offer measures, protocols, and methods of incentivizing and rewarding socio-political desirable human behavior or punishing socio-politically undesirable human behavior. The law offers options and legal consequences. Hence, for some, a socio-political contract is better understood, better remembered, and stands the test of history and time if turned into law, such as a constitution, an act, or an ordinance. To understand how these two elements, politics and law, play out, let's look at the national or domestic level. The legislative branch of the national government makes and implements political decisions like counterterrorism measures or health emergency protocols by passing legislation or laws. Hence, law is one mechanism but not the only mechanism through which politics is conducted. Another area where politics and law play out is the judicial branch. Legal judgments have socio-economic and political implications, causing celebration or unrest depending on the judicial decision. Thus, a citizen's socio-political rights, privileges, freedoms, and the extent of these concepts are defined or elaborated or clarified by judges, cementing the relationship between politics and law. With power as a means of influencing the behavior of people and exercising control over resources, and law as a means of determining who gets what and who can do what. At the international level, the global distribution of power and resources may be coursed through international law, through trade laws, rights over natural resources, and almost everything under the sun. Well, to begin, there is no international legislature to craft and make international law. This means that there is no single entity that makes and creates law in terms of world politics. However, there is an organ of the United Nations that is the closest equivalent to an international legislature, the United Nations General Assembly, or the UNGA. Here, resolutions are crafted and one member state gets one vote. But with enough votes, usually 50% plus 1 or 2/3 of the assembly for important questions, the UNGA passes resolutions not to make law but to set a global political direction on a certain policy area, like the environment, human rights, war, public health, etc. Law in world politics is also present in treaties, otherwise known as conventions or covenants or charters or pacts. Treaties are written agreements between states and international organizations, or between international organizations. One important concept in treaties is the principle of pacta sunt servanda, by which states are bound to carry out in good faith the obligations they have assumed by treaty. Another concept is the concept of consent, whereby states are not bound by treaties that it is not a party of. This is such because states are constitutionally independent, the highest forms of sovereignty. Nothing is above the state as a political entity or organization in international law. In future lessons, we will discuss the different types of treaties and also the different types of principles at play when writing and following a treaty. So going back to politics and law, although what is put into writing in a treaty take on a legal form, politics is very present while writing a treaty. Negotiations, strategies, compromises turn the clear blue legal waters of a treaty into a murky and muddy mix of national and international interests. Law in world politics is also present in terms of customary international law. Customary international law is created by what states do, so state practice, with opinio juris present, where that action is carried out with a view to the rules and principles of international law. To be more specific, opinio juris is that the state has been choosing to act in that way for reasons of law, or with the law in mind. An example of customary international law is the treatment of diplomats. Since the time of the ancients, rules and privileges regarding foreign diplomats and representatives have been developed. This is so in order to serve state interests so that the messenger will not be shot, or that the political and economic channels of peace and commerce will not cease. Of course, as with all rules, the implementation is not perfect. But nevertheless, as history moved, the treatment of diplomats and representatives further developed into a complex set of rules and eventually was written down and codified into two treaties: the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. Do note, however, that not every habitual state practice will become customary international law. Some state habits are too trivial, while other state actions are impossible to reconcile with law, like torture. Anyway, and wrapping up, we'll get back to treaties and customary international law in the future by studying the sources of international law. So in the next lesson, we'll still continue to focus on how politics and law mix, especially in terms of the enforcement of international law and the judicial branch or the courts of international law, as well as the relationships of the rule of law and the rule of power amidst world politics. See you in the next lesson.